All right. Thank you for joining me, Jonny Versity. Jonny Versity is a YouTuber. Johnny, you came to my attention by one of my followers on YouTube who put a note saying I should interview you after my interview with Christopher John Berjerkness. Now, Christopher John Berjerkness has this very overarching anti-Israel, anti-Jewish conspiracy theory where he basically gets into, he's written several books, Jewish science. He talks about Hitler as being a Zionist. He talks about the Talmud as having all kinds of weird stuff in it, which sort of might be a little true, but some of the, the way he gets into it is that there's this Jewish conspiracy theory to corrupt the world, and that Jews have are bad and evil characters. And he stormed off my program when I challenged him on that point, with the business of the Talmud and Jews having a bad character. But yet, as I'm getting more into YouTube and the wonderful world of YouTube, since this is what I'm doing, I'm coming across all of these anti-Jewish and anti-Israel conspiracies, and some of them are from people on the left. It's not so much right-wingers, although you still have those old-fashioned preachers who talk about the Christ killers and that stuff. But it's also, guys like Adam Green. I don't know if you know who he is, and what's his name, Ryan something. They're young guys. They're good-looking guys. They have huge followings. They're I guess left of center, hip, charismatic, and they just are obsessed with Israel in a very not nasty way. So I guess that I want to start by asking you in the broad sense, what do you make of that?
Okay, so what happened with Israel is that there are a few dynamics that went into this. The first one was Israel, obviously, if we are talking about the left. And by the way, I think that anti-Semitism coming from the left, it's not that it's worse. It's worse in terms of the outcome. First of all, even people on the right like me, right? And I'm considered like what I basically like almost extreme right. I've been called a fascist before it was cool.
Right. That's not my
and cool with it. I'm okay. And I think that one of the problems with anti-Semitism coming from the left is that people sort of assume that the left is coming from a more compassionate position, right? So they see it in a different light. When someone says something hateful about Israel or the Jews, or somehow implies it in some way or another, they sort of assume different things about their position rather than what they think about, a white supremacist saying something about Jews. And, oh, yeah, they're white supremacist and obviously evil. And today we see, in general, I mean, Republicans are now as evil, basically, right? Or any right-winger out there. Mm-hmm. Now, the criticism itself, the hate itself becomes more dangerous because it's more... it's almost accepted within mainstream, in our case, mostly mainstream media, and also growing. Really, a real concern is that you see it creeping into mainstream left politics. So, looking here,
it's becoming mainstreamed in the United States with. Ilhan Omar and AOC and all these other people, and Tlaib, making comments about being warm and fuzzy over the Holocaust. I mean, recently, this kind of stuff. In the case of these liberal anti-Israel people online, I don't think they're anti-Semites. I don't even think they're necessarily anti-Jewish. They're not harping on the Jew Christ killer stuff. They actually believe that they're into peace. They don't want war, and they think that the Jews are behind wars because they think that Jews believe that war benefits the state of Israel. So they think the Jews were behind the Iraq War. They think the Jews are now agitating for war against Iran. They blame Jews for the World War II. I mean, it goes into this idea that the Jews are using their influence and power behind the throne, so to speak. Plus, they connect Jews with international banking and merchant banking,
Mm-hmm.
which, by the way, is not really true. Certainly not true anymore. I mean, the big banking power actually is now in China, if anywhere.
And the
But
Middle East.
that's right, and that Jews always have been in banking, but the big banking houses, I mean, it's not a thing. I mean, the actual criticism of private banking is legitimate, but the idea of making this into a Jewish thing and then saying that the Jews are using that influence to cause wars, that seems to be the crux of their
Yeah.
conspiracy theory.
So,
So
uh,
what do you
uh,
make of that?
I'm gonna try and make it's a bit of a it's going to be a little bit long-winded and it's a long simply because it's just the dynamics are very complex. So again, the first thing I wanted to say is that it's simply yeah, that's my daughter right
Oh,
there.
that's nice.
I'm sort of half babysitting. I'm
No,
babysitting
no,
in the
no, that's
dad
fine.
way, which
I'm
basically
the
means.
father of a daughter. I know. I'm with you on that. So
So
anyway, go
in
on.
any case, um, so I just wanted to start and say that the left wing anti Semitism, and I do regard it as anti Semitism, and I'll soon explain why. And I do regard them as anti Semites.
Okay.
Now, so that's just saying that, listen, there's something a bit more dangerous about anti-Semitism coming from the left because most people sort of assume, like you just did, in fact. Notice that you said, they're not really anti-Semites, they're just against war, etc., etc. And that's exactly the point, and that's really dangerous. But then when you think about, oh yeah, I'm on a call, baby.
Hi, sweetie. All right.
When you think about um, what they are actually saying, so and again, you just mentioned it. They're using their influence. They, as in
The Jew.
Jews, this monolith, right? And you can almost imagine that conniving little Jew doing that horrible little face there, thinking about how he's gonna pull a pinky and brain over the world and rule everyone. And that is a pure anti-Semitic trope, which we all know.
Yeah,
Now,
I agree.
they might be harboring it, and somehow there's like a confluence of many ideas that come together, and they just do that connection without being aware of it, maybe. But they have to have the belief to begin with that Jews are capable or want to do something like that in order to then make the connection. So you can say, you can say that the military industrial complex, which is a really stupid term, but never mind. You can say that the military industrial complex has influence on nations, and they're actually driving nations into wars. And you can say that financiers are, at the very least, it's obvious that some of them, although that's actually not true, that it might look on the surface as if some of them have this motivation of having countries go to war. Although anyone who knows anything about economics knows war sucks money out of the economy. Yeah, some people might get rich, but overall, you're going to get way richer in peace times where countries can actually trade. Trade is how you get growth. Trade is how you get value. Trade is how you get basically wealth. Not through war. War is not trade, but that's a different story. It's obviously, but again, obviously there are people who have something to benefit from war. It's been like that throughout the ages. But then, so believing that, okay, fine. But then you have to connect it somehow with some belief that Jews specifically have a special role. And that belief is anti-Semitic. It is deeply rooted within centuries of conspiracy theories against Jews and what they are up to in this world. And there is actually you can actually trace, right, those beliefs and the Christ killer sort of conspiracy theories and the purity of the race conspiracies, everything together. You can basically trace them back to some common ancestor that goes back ages and ages. And I'm not even sure how long ago this all started. So I do think it is proper anti-Semitism. In the case of the left, if you go to hardcore Marxists, well, Marx himself was obviously, I mean, Marx wrote worse things about Jews than
He's a
about
terrible
Catholics.
anti-Semite. Yeah, I mean, he wrote the book called "A World Without Jews." No, he's on the Jewish question. I mean, in a sense, if you look at Marx's anti-Semitism, it gets into the very core of the anti-Semitic project, as I see it. First of all, this whole idea that because the Jews the Christians in the formal sense implicate Jews in the crucifixion of Jesus, they feel that Jews, and comes from E. Michael Jones, who's been a regular guest of mine, great scholar. I admire him, but he's way out to lunch on this one issue. But yet it's a conventional, traditional Catholic view that because we were involved with crucifying Jesus, which by the way we were not, but putting that aside, that we somehow reject the logos of the universe. We reject logic. We're in rebellion, and we're revolutionaries, and we're trying to overthrow the order of morality in Europe. I would argue the opposite. I think that Jews provided a moral background for Europe and for Christian Europe for many thousands of years, and that Judaism is all about logos. We believe in God, we believe in family, we believe in education, we believe in the moral and ethical code of Sinai, and that's been the guiding factor within Judaism. And the Talmud is nothing more than Jewish law that has kept us functioning and coherent for 2,000 years of diaspora. It's not this mystical thing it might have a few nasty comments in there about Jesus, I grant you. The early Christian doctrines had some pretty nasty comments about Jews. They weren't, there was some fierce competition. They weren't getting along well. So, they slipped in a few of these things. But that's really tangential to what the Talmud is. It's a positive document that looks at how to live a Jewish life, particularly in the diaspora. Now, as far as the Jews involved with international banking, the people that they're talking about who are international bankers, whether they observe the Sabbath on Saturday or Sunday is not relevant. There's just as many Christians involved in that cabal. That is a serious problem. And to try to make this into a Jewish issue, it's actually, I mean, this still delegitimizes a legitimate conversation about the wisdom of having private central banking, which is a legitimate issue.
I have to interrupt you because it always makes me laugh thinking, who invented banking system? The Italians.
Exactly.
Who crucified Jesus?
The
Essentially,
Italians. I mean, the Bank of America was started by Italians. The Venetians are the ones who started the whole business of credit and what they call usury. Not the Jews. I mean, the Jews were allowed to do it because the Catholic Church banned it. But nevertheless, I mean, it's not permitted in Judaism. It's not condoned. I mean, it's not as seriously banned, but the business of credit and private banking is something it's an issue in and of itself. And to try to muddy the waters by saying, well, this person is named Levine, it's beside the point. It's getting away from a genuine critique of this issue.
So here there's okay. So first of all, banking. There's a lovely book by Neil Ferguson, The Ascent
Oh
of Money.
yeah, good man. Yeah,
It's wonderful, and there you can actually trace the history. As far as Jews are concerned, people need to remember that throughout history, especially in Christendom, we weren't allowed to own land.
right.
So what do you do now? So you can't own land, which is really the property back in the Middle Ages, right? And before that. So what do you do with your capital? Well, what are you going to do? Well, here's one thing. Christians can't, well, they can, but they have to go again, going back to Neil Ferguson. So they have these really neat tricks of you know, taking, well, if I loan you this amount in this currency, but you have to give it back in a different currency, well, I can actually make a profit
Make
right
a
there.
margin. Yeah,
Yeah, make a, so that's how they used to do it. But if you're a Jew, well, according to basic religious law, right? Yeah, I can lend you money. I can loan you money and charge interest, and that's fine. So if you can't own land and you need to do something with your capital, well, here are two things. And you're a merchant, obviously, because again, you can't own land, then you're going to become a merchant. Now you have some capital that you have laying around. You can't do anything with it except if you want to grow it. Well, okay, if you don't want to be a
right.
merchant.
It becomes a commodity.
And
Uh,
even more interesting, and this is maybe so it's just something, I consider myself a nationalist, and when I try to explain, I say, listen, nationalism fosters cooperation, and I actually take Jews as an example. So if you're talking about merchants, they have to move from one country to another, carrying gold coins with you on the road. That's usually not a very good idea. Before the age of banks, what would you do? Well, it's a really good thing if you have someone in some other city, in some other country that you can trust with your money. And basically, just, if you have an IOU that this guy will accept, and that guy will accept, well, all you need to carry around is that IOU. In the case of the Jews, because they were such a tiny little group, hated by everyone, well, yeah, I trusted you. You trusted me. We're basically the same. We're the same family, the tribe, right? We call
right.
ourselves that.
That's right. That's right.
Um, so the way Jews got involved with money is super interesting. And once you suddenly inject into that, the fact that whether you like it or not, and no matter how you want to explain it, I don't care. There is a fact that cannot be disputed that Jews are one standard. Ashkenazi Jews are, with regards to IQ, one standard deviation above the mean, which is also the average by definition in IQ, which is 100. So Ashkenazi Jews, on average, are around 115, which is one standard deviation. Now, that means that, well, this specific group is probably better in math. Even like the outliers in this group simply are better than the outliers in the general population. So you're going to have an overrepresentation of Jews simply because there's quite a lot of us down there at the tail end of the bell curve. So, and obviously, if you want to deal with money, well, you better be good with numbers. You better be good at building risk trees or risk assessments, and that involves, again, math. You need to, okay, so there's this and that chance that this guy will. So that's, I know I'm going into a tangent and it's not really the subject, but I think that the role of Jews with money is super interesting because
It is.
it allows you to learn so many things about group dynamics, about cooperation and nationalism, about overrepresentation of groups because of higher IQ. So it's really interesting, and obviously how successful minorities specifically seem in the eyes of their host society.
You know, you bring up an interesting thing because I think that the Jewish character, as we know it today, was developed and honed on the anvil of the diaspora over 2,000 years when the Jews did not have their own nation. We didn't have a pope. We didn't have an empire. We didn't have an army. And we were dependent upon Christian nations, primarily some Muslim nations. And the result is that Jews became street smart. You know, they developed wits. That combined with their veneration of education, of family and extended family, and as you say, we develop a network of loyalty with other Jews. That's a fact. I mean, conspiracy theorists and anti-Semites view that as a negative. I don't. I think it's good. You know, we help, we give each other a little boost. And it's a survival thing, and you'll find this true oftentimes with minorities in other countries, like the Armenians in Turkey. You know, they were the Christian minority who were persecuted, and they became the top of Turkish society after a while. They were the bankers, they were the merchants, they were the people who did the actual business of the nation. And that because the establishment, the Christian establishment, was not permitted to do certain things under Catholic canon law, they would rely on their Jews to do these things. And of course, the Jews then embraced that and helped those kings. And they engaged in diplomacy and trade and all these other things. But here we are now in the 20th century, and the Jews have attained statehood in Eretz Israel, the Holy Land, the land that we pray to every day, the land that we have a legitimate claim to, of course. And this, I think, when you get into Catholic anti-Jewish attitudes, not to single out E. Michael Jones, but he's such a presence online. I think the thing that irritates him about Israel is what irritates Christians going back, in that they viewed the fact that the Jewish people lost their sovereignty, they lost their temple, that this was proof that they were wrong, and that they had been replaced by the new Israel, the new Jerusalem, which is Rome. But now and then here we come back as upstarts, and we reassert our sovereignty and our statehood in Israel. We retake Jerusalem in 1967. Now the U.S. Embassy has moved to Jerusalem, and it's aggravating to them because it causes them to, I guess, question their faith, which I don't want them to do. I want them to be Christians, but it's incredible religion. I'm not here to make them do that. I'm simply saying that they're reacting to the fact that Judaism has entered a new stage now, in that we have taken the next step toward reasserting our rights as a sovereign people in the real sense, in the physical sense. What do you think?
Okay, wow, there's a lot to unpack there. Okay, first of all, I think it's worth mentioning that I'm 1 minute. I'm just gonna close the door because my wife is here. So yeah, gotcha. I'm off the hook.
I'm with you. Oh my goodness, what is this?
Okay,
all right.
Yeah. By the way, I'm in my weird home office. This used to be, I guess, I think it used to be sort of a student apartment. I don't know. This is a weird place. Never mind.
All right.
Okay. I have a bison here. So I feel like I'm in the the Middle Ages.
It's like a college dorm. All right.
Exactly. That's how I feel. Then again, it's my office. I can go up into the shower. That's nice. Okay. So I think it's worth mentioning that I am I still use the term militant atheist. And it's specifically, I think, a lot of it because of Israel and because of Judaism. I wanted a little thing about the Talmud. The Talmud is a book written, well, it's actually many books.
It's about 20 books.
And it also have two distinct versions to it.
Right.
And it was written literally over 2,000 years, literally 2,000 years, based on a book that was written for around 15,000 years and was written by different people in different places in different times, responding to different problems. One important thing to remember about rabbinical Judaism, which is really the latest form of Judaism. Today, it's evolved further into Hasidic Judaism, and you have on the other end of the spectrum of rabbinical Judaism, you have Reform Judaism. Now, what's important to mention is that the rabbinic revolution, starting around the time of Jesus, really, just before that, the great promise of rabbinical Judaism was the amount of flexibility it allowed to inject into Judaism. From what we know from evolution, you either adapt or that's it. You're out of the gene pool. And the same goes for the meme pool. If ideas cannot adapt to changing times, that's it. They're going to be destroyed. And it goes also for national identities. And before the rabbinical revolution, we had the Sadducees, which are really, I don't want to draw too many comparisons, but they're like fundamentalists that would make Bible thumpers blush. They're like, okay, I don't want to make that comparison, but like think of the most extreme strands of Islam today, and everything has to be written, and you can't stray away from the text. I forgot there's like an idiom that says exactly, I don't know, something like a tittle or whatever. Never mind. So rabbinic Judaism comes along and introduces a degree of freedom above. And the idea is quite ingenious. It says, well, God gave us the Bible, therefore it's ours. It's not his anymore. Therefore, we can interpret it. We can interpret it and do whatever it is we think we should do with that. Okay, that's awesome. That's great. That makes life much easier, because then you can maneuver your way with your religion and but still adapt to changing times. And that's what the Talmud is. The Talmud is the evolution of Judaism, and it responding to different times via very, very interesting mechanism of people arguing with each other, which stands to reason if you know Jews. So when you read something in the Talmud, and believe me, I've had my share of tarnishing that book. I mean, if anyone who follows me in Hebrew knows how critical I am of it. But even I know that sometimes I can take something out of context, and it's one line said by one rabbi,
right? It's not
immediately contradicted by another rabbi, either at the same time or 100 years later. At an outer rim.
It's commentary. It's dialectical conversation. I think the Talmud was influenced by the Greeks, who, if you read Greek philosophy, whether it be Platonic works, Aristotle, any of those people, they would sit around a table and they would throw out a question, and each of them would come at it and they would scream at each other, and they would record everything, and you'd see completely opposite views all in the same book. And it's that method, that Socratic method, that dialectic, that was applied by the Talmudic rabbis. Now, I'm more of a believer. I believe that the Lord God, King of the universe, handed the Torah to the world at Sinai. I think something happened there, and the Talmud was the oral law. It was commentary. a good source of understanding the Talmud actually is the Shulchan Aruch, the Ethics of the Fathers, which is published in most Jewish prayer books, siddurs, in your synagogue. It's available to everyone, as is the Talmud. There's nothing secretive about the Talmud. Yeah. And that Talmudic Judaism really started to develop, or Rabbinic Judaism, long before Jesus. It actually started, I think, with Ezra, and it furthered in the Greek period, and it showed. And when you look at actually Jesus himself, what we can learn about him from the New Testament, his Sermon on the Mount, his arguments, they were entirely within Pharisaic rabbinic dialogue. Yeah. Jesus was a Talmudist.
Oh, sure. They call him rabbi.
And he was
if you're called rabbi, you are a Pharisee.
He was a very accomplished Talmudist, and he was, in the literal sense, a Pharisee. And I think that he, the criticisms that he was having with the other Pharisees at that time were legitimate and within the context of Jewish dialogue. They're the same criticisms I have today against the rabbis. He was right.
So just a few notes. You can't call him a Talmudist Jew because the Talmud is not yet written.
Well,
really,
it was a Pharisaic.
So let's call it. So in Pharisee, if you take the word itself, really what you have in Judaism are at that point are two strands. You can say let's boil them down to two strands: the literalists and the interpretivists. I don't know.
Correct. The Sadducees and the Pharisees, as you say.
Exactly. So the Sadducees, they're the ones that die off eventually. Because, as I said, if you don't adapt, you're wiped out. And it's true for the genetic realm, as it is true for the mimetic realm.
And by the way, they came back like 500 years later in the form of this Karaite movement that was excommunicated from Judaism. So they're literal interpreters. They would sit in the dark on Shabbos because they wouldn't light a candle. I mean, they were literalists to the point of, they would not look at any commentary. And the only thing I might take issue with you a little bit here, Johnny, and I don't know if this is really an issue, but I don't think that the Talmud contradicts the Torah. The Talmud is trying to understand the Torah. It is trying to interpret the Torah and get to some of the more mystical aspects of the Torah, which are not necessarily knowable in the literal sense. But it doesn't try to make it up. I mean, they're not like a Supreme Court judge that decides what the Constitution means. They are literalists, I mean, they're going to look at the Constitution, which is the Torah, and they're going to try to make case law as you go, which is what the Supreme Court does, but not to deviate from the original intent. They're trying to bring the Torah into practical life and deal with and adjudicate situations that were occurring in their own time. But it is entirely consistent with the Torah. It does not, it's based on the Torah. Anyway, but maybe you and I don't agree on that.
Okay, so you mentioned Karaite Judaism. Karaite Judaism is not Sadducees reincarnate. It's their premise is, in a way, you can say that it's more. Again, I hate drawing conclusions like these, but you can say that rabbinical Judaism is more like the Sunni Islam, because you have the Hadith, which are sort of external books, versus Shiite Islam, where the Hadith are considered, they're just nothing. They're just inventions of humans, and we're not going to go there. But in any case, and Karaites simply say, listen, this is not the Bible. And in the Bible itself, it says, which is where you have the literalist view coming from. In the Bible itself, it says, you can't deviate, you can make your own thing. This is what is written, this is what it is, and that's it. But what they do, which Sadducees probably didn't, and I think, and this is why I actually have a very warm place in my heart to Karaite Judaism, is that they say, so Moses himself, and you mentioned Ezra, so Ezra and Nehemiah. You can go and translate that to English. I think the Hebrew names are a bit more Nehemiah. So
Nehemiah.
it doesn't sound as good. I think Nehemiah. It sounds more.
Right.
Yeah.
Give it the chach.
Yeah. You need to clear your throat.
Yes.
So, they have specific rules about how often you have to read the Bible. You need to remember that in those days, well, the Torah, right, specifically, in those days, obviously, most people don't know how to read and write. And worse than that, like, what will you read out of? It's all written on like super expensive either papyrus or a skin or whatever it is. And so they had the idea of, every 7 years we have to go around, read out the Torah, and that's it. So the Karaites said, okay, so what that means, if it's every 7 years and all the people of a village go and they gather and and they listen to it, well, humans learn to speak and understand something about language about a year, all right, when they're about a year old. So that means that the Bible should be understood by listening alone by an 8-year-old Israelite, ancient Israelite. Since these rules start, if you go to Moses, it's, let's say, about 1500 BCE. If you go to Ezra and Nehemiah, it's around, what is it, 500?
About 300 BC.
Okay. No, I think.
Oh, it's a return from Babylon, maybe 500.
About 500, yeah.
Right.
So they say, well, let's try and understand, what would a 8-year-old Israelite in 500 BC hearing the stories in the Torah, what would he understand? What we need to follow is that. And that's why actually many of them are not just biblical scholars, but deal with history, archaeology, and anthropology. A lot of them do reconstruction work on I forgot the Dead Sea Scrolls and stuff like that. So Karaite Judaism, I actually think, to me, in a way, Karaite Judaism is a bit more real Judaism.
Okay, well, we'll have to depart on that one, but
yeah.
But the other thing that I want to mention, speaking of which, the rabbinic approach, you're talking about the Peshat look at the Torah, the simple reading of the Torah on its surface. The rabbinic approach looks at several layers of meaning of the Torah. You could go deeper and deeper. I think there's 7 layers. And this gets into more mystical understandings, more esoteric understandings of Torah, and it gets into some very dangerous doctrines like the Zohar and Kabbalah. Now, I only bring this up because the Kabbalah goes into the imagination of the anti-Jewish movement. And again, I'm not to pick on E. Michael Jones. He's a great man. I admire him. Hopefully he's going to come back on with me. But he, in his book, The Jewish Revolutionary Spirit, he links the Kabbalah to, witchcraft and black magic practiced by Jews, and then transmitted into the Protestant Reformation, which he indirectly blames on Jews, and then the British mysticism, which he blames on Jews. Because he comes at this from a Catholic view. So if you view that Judaism as a source of revolution, you can fit everything into that ideology, that everybody that opposes the Catholic Church is a revolutionary, thus they are Judaized. They're influenced by Judaism. And the part of this I want to talk about, though, is the Kabbalah, the Zohar, that it's linked by anti-Jewish thinkers to witchcraft, to all sorts of practices that are, for lack of a better word, are satanic. And what I would suggest to that is that that's complete crap. The Zohar and Kabbalah is nothing more and nothing less than a means of studying Torah. It is simply a means of getting to some of the deeper and less revealed elements of understanding various passages in the Torah. And it has been abused by people who don't understand how to look at it. I mean, there's a reason why the rabbis say that in order to study Zohar and Kabbalah, you have to be at least 40 years old. You have to be at a certain level of education and spirituality and character to qualify to even begin to study it, because it's very, tricky stuff. I mean, it can be very dangerous if it's in the wrong hands. So what you had there in the Middle Ages was either corrupted Jews or Christians who were taking the Kabbalah and turning it into some kind of a guide for black magic. I think indirectly it's also a way for Christians to blame Judaism on the witchcraft movement, which is a Christian phenomena, and frankly the Satanic movement, which is also a Christian phenomena. But so what can you say about the Kabbalah and what's this whole misinterpretation of it?
So this is interesting because it actually goes down to a different. So if you talk to someone like me, a non-believer to say the least, I would say, the Zohar, it was written by Rabbi Moshe de Leon in the 13th century.
Right.
Okay, if you go and ask a religious Jew, they will say, well, it was written in the 1st century somewhere by, I think is Bar Yochai, maybe even. I don't remember exactly who.
Well, I don't think anyone says that de Leon invented this whole thing out of whole cloth. I mean, it definitely came.
But I'm willing to say that he invented almost all of it. Some of it is based on earlier writings, that's for sure. But Jewish mysticism, specifically Kabbalah. Okay, a little side note here. I went and studied, not exactly Kabbalah, but let's call it Kabbalah to the masses. When I was a teenager, when I actually was still interested in those things.
Did you study with the same people that Madonna studied it on?
It's a very similar organization, but I think they basically limit it to Jews.
It's a bit new agey. Right.
The organization that I was in touch with was they didn't teach it to Gentiles. It was Jews and Jews only. But that's a different story. And it was I can tell you about it on a separate.
We'll do another show on that one.
Yeah. In fact, we're already going on a tangent more about Judaism than about anti-Semitism, but you know what? It's actually good.
Well, I'm bringing it up because of the mischaracterization of Kabbalah by anti-Jewish thinkers.
So now, basically, those anti-Jewish thinkers, what they need to do is, A, accept the religious, not even just the Jewish religious view, specifically the rabbinical view, more specifically the ultra-Orthodox rabbinical view, that it is an ancient book from around the 1st century. I started saying CE for some reason, but never mind. DC. Yeah, so, but if you ask any researcher in the world, any academic in the world, they will tell you, yeah, of course it has some earlier roots to it, but really it was brought together in the 13th century and for a very good reason. This is when alchemy starts being a thing in Europe. Now, alchemy, it's really good. If anyone has ever tried to read an alchemy book, you understand its appeal. It's a very appealing idea. And there's a good reason why Newton himself dealt more with alchemy than with calculus or physics. And a lot of Jews went into, even if you go to the Rambam, he's basically sort of, into it. And that's pretty dangerous. If you're a Jew and you're looking at that and it's a Christian thing, this alchemy stuff, that's a Christian thing. Well, we can't have that, that's avodah zarah. That's basically we need to
Understood.
get them back. So we need our own version of it. Cool, great. Let's have our own version of it. We have a bit of mysticism in Judaism. You said 7 interpretations. There are actually supposed to be 70, right? 70 faces to the Torah. So obviously, some people in history along the way talked about the mysticism within Judaism and more mystic interpretations of the Torah. Now add to that yourself Kabbalah.
Mm-hmm.
And if you want to blame Jews for inventing alchemy,
That's a stretch. For some reason, Johnny, you're breaking up. You're breaking up on me a little bit here. I'm not sure why, but you're having some sound problems. So maybe,
it's probably
lower your volume a little bit. That might help. And let me just see.
Let Skype take hold of my.
Let's lower the volume and see if we can improve that. But I just, while you're lowering your volume, let me respond briefly. First of all, I mean, the Judaism, if it stands for anything, it's completely, from day one all the way till today, opposes paganism in all of its forms. It opposes idol worship. The whole Torah is against this. There's an enormous body of work in terms of why we have that. So to suggest that we're into some kind of, practice of magic and witchcraft or whatever, it's just completely and utterly false. The other thing I've noticed about the Kabbalah, and I'm not a student of it, but I have looked at it more than the average person, is that the Kabbalah introduces Christian ideas into Judaism. It introduces the Trinity. It introduces Christ. It introduces an end time scenario with an Antichrist. So, I would think that, if anything, it might have Christian origins. Because it definitely, rather than Judaizing Christianity, you could say that the Kabbalah has Christianized Judaism.
Definitely.
In many ways.
100%. As I said, it goes back to alchemy. And alchemy is it's a Christian invention based on, remember that this is more or less the point where they rediscover the ancient works of the ancient Greeks and Romans, and right, basically this is now the rise of the West at that point. And they have to fuse that, like anything else, you have to fuse it with Christianity, and that's how you get alchemy, which, by the way, was also considered by many Christians as a sort of their version of avodah zarah, their version of it was sort of witchcraft in a way, although many people did it. And
sure, and it was viewed as the cutting edge of science in its day. I want to ask you, Johnny, do you know anything about the Sabbatian Frankist movement and of Shabtai Zvi? Because I view that as the beginning of a major corruption of Judaism, a major inroads into Judaism that led eventually to Bolshevism and Jews getting involved in really things that are complete heresy to the Jewish spirit. And my understanding is that Shabtai Zvi, who declared his messiahship in 1666, which there's some questions about whether or not the Catholic Church might have been behind this, because that's a Christian a number, and how it all of a sudden was he promoted all over the world, it was like an email, it was sort of like went viral, right? Suddenly, and he's acting like a rock star. It's like the Rolling Stones on tour, going around, with people swooning and traveling throughout Turkey and just creating havoc. And he declares himself the Messiah by committing every kind of sin you can imagine. The idea being that the Messiah will come when mankind reaches a certain level of spirituality, that we are prepared for that. But at the same time, I don't know if it's Talmud or if it's just Jewish folklore, but that if mankind reaches such a level of degradation and perversion and collapse, then the Messiah will come. And Shabtai Zvi went with the perverted side of it. he was doing everything you can imagine with everything that moved. I mean, he was, he declared his messiahship by having a ham sandwich in front of the Torah on Shabbos. I mean, and he was excommunicated by the rabbis of his hometown of Smyrna immediately. But he did take off in Judaism for some reason. It's interesting. And it became a craze. And then when he was exposed as a fraud by the Sultan of Constantinople, who called him in by saying, you have a choice. If you're the Messiah, then I can shoot you and you won't die. So, or you can convert to Islam. He converted to Islam. Yeah. But the thing is that he continued on as a secret Jew, and he developed a cult known as the Donma sect that had a great deal of influence in Turkey. And one of his followers, 100 years later, Jacob Frank, developed a sect in Europe that we call the Sabbateans or the Frankists, and that they were very secretive. There was a war, a spiritual war within Judaism at that time against the Frankists, and that they were finding them and excommunicating them. But the Frankists made major inroads into Judaism, and I think that they are responsible for a major collapse of the Jewish spirit. What do you think?
Okay, so that is an area that I know less about. Here's something I do know. Basically, so I said, rabbinical Judaism, you trace it back to around, anywhere, but you can go back to the Hasmoneans, right?
Yes, exactly.
That's really the beginning.
Yeah, and that would be Judah Maccabee, in case anyone's wondering, the dynasty, the Second Commonwealth.
Yeah, and that's basically the Sadducees. So it's around 200, 300 BC, I think. I think so, yeah. And then you have in the first century, this is already in Roman era. This is where you have, you can say already rabbinical Judaism and not just Pharisees. But if you want to say either ultra-Orthodox or Orthodox or even Hasidic Judaism, in a sense, although that will be a little bit of a stretch, that really goes back to Shabtai Tzvi, because Shabtai Tzvi sort of, suddenly people understood, oh no, okay, there is a danger within Judaism, and it is this whole Messiah thing. Now, we saw that before. We had a whole Messiah thing, and we were kicked out of Israel. We don't like messiahs. It doesn't matter if they're good or bad. And a whole new set of rules were implemented in mainstream Judaism to prevent it from happening again. It's a very interesting reason of how Judaism suddenly evolved. Again, it goes back to the idea of an evolution of and how memes evolve through time if they are allowed to adapt. And there was a major adaptation done there. Then, of course, the next major adaptation is in the Age of Enlightenment, and that's really where you get proper Hasidic Jews. They're basically a backlash against Enlightenment. Now, what happens on the fringes of Judaism, I don't know, but it's still, I still consider, in a way, I say, Rabbinic Judaism itself introduced a lot of problems in Judaism. Fine, but it is part of Judaism. There was and there is infighting within Jewish groups, sects, strands, rabbis, all the time.
Of course.
Yeah, all the time. But I don't think that you can say whatever it is you think caused Judaism to be X. And I don't think this X is any worse than any other religion out there. All religions have BS to an extraordinary degree, in some cases bordering on the completely crazy, dangerous stuff. In our days, it's Islam. Islam is really the example. And if you want one religion that have made more atheists more than any other religion, it's Islam. People look at Islam and they say, okay, this religion thing, this is a bit dangerous. We need to think carefully about what we're doing here when we're talking about religious beliefs.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll just mention, atheism doesn't mean you reject spirituality. It simply means you reject a supernatural, all-knowing being that created, or like gods specifically. And spirituality doesn't die. This is why, in fact, in a way, we have the New Age. But that's, again, another tangent.
Well, we can debate that on another show. I'd like
to.
So,
at the end, what I'm saying is Judaism as a religion, as a philosophy, is not that much better or worse than any other religion, especially when you take these religions as they evolve over time. I think that today, Protestant Christianity, which I think is the reason why we live in the world we live. You mentioned Judaism as sort of contributing to that. I beg to differ. I think that without Protestant Christianity,
I didn't say it did. I said that this Christian philosopher says it did.
Oh, okay. So I think he's wrong. Yeah. I think that the ideas of enlightenment do not work well within Judaism. And it brings me, this is nice, because it sort of ties back to the beginning. And we were talking about why the left has this problem with us. Well, people need to remember that unlike faith religions, such as Christianity or Islam, Judaism is an ethnic identity. So it's an ethno-religion.
Right.
So I'm still Jewish. I consider myself Jewish, and other people see me as a Jew, right? Because, if you're talking about in a rabbinical Judaism sense, then my mother is Jewish, hence I am Jewish. You cannot be an apostate in Judaism. I can try and convert to whatever it is I want to.
No, I disagree with you on that. You can be an apostate in Judaism. Let's just briefly talk about, since you brought it up, who is a Jew, and then I want to go into, because we already talked about the Sabbateans, which I say corrupted Judaism. You're right, Judaism is an ethno-religion, but you can be an ethnic Jew without being religious, as you say. But if you're actively supporting another religion, you are an apostate. Like, as an atheist, you're basically, let me just say this, you're basically not believing in anything. I mean, you believe in nothing. And so you can still be within the Jewish fold, but if you accept another religion, whether it be paganism or Christianity or Islam, then you are an apostate, because you're actively then believing in another approach toward God than the Jewish approach. Doesn't mean you can't come back. Now, also as a religion, Judaism you don't necessarily have to be ethnically Jewish to be a Jew. Like, for example, President Trump's daughter is a Jew. She was not born a Jew. She was born Christian, but she is as much a Jew as anyone else. And Judaism has a long history of people converting to Judaism, whether it's because of a marriage or for whatever reason. In fact, the main rabbi, I understand, at the Kotel in Jerusalem, one of the most orthodox of rabbis, was a former Lutheran minister who came to Israel as part of a mission, and he became a believer in Judaism and converted. So, it's both an ethnicity and a religion. It's an interesting question. I guess that I want to bring things up to a bit to today, and why it is that you get all these young, hip YouTube guys that are basically left of center. I mean, I don't know. Maybe they're on the right. I don't know. In this day and age, people don't even think in those terms. But they're anti-Israel. And I think that the anti-Israel movement, and you can speak to this maybe, Johnny, as an Israeli, I think it's motivated by two factors today. I'm not talking about historic anti-Israelism or anti-Semitism. from the left. And that is that the left resents Israel for two reasons. Firstly, because it is a capitalist country. Israel is a modern startup nation where you have businesses who are innovating, who are creating. You have people who are becoming successful. It honors business. It honors the individual being a sovereign person who makes their own life, controls their own destiny, can become a success. I mean, this is a very much a fundamental part of the whole Jewish ethos. This is what Karl Marx railed about in his anti-Semitic treatise. The Jew stands for self-interest and huckstering, he says. Huckstering just means trade. We trade with each other, goods and services, ideas. We believe in, the preservation of money, which is nothing more than an abstract means of accumulating property. We believe in property. And so the left hates Israel for that because it represents capitalism. They want socialism. They want to bring about the one world ant colony where everyone's de facto equal. The other reason they hate Israel is because Israel is Jewish. We believe, and I'm speaking generally here, not specifically, we believe in God. We believe that power comes from something outside of the corrupt, manipulative hand of man. In other words, reality, existence, morality, all of it is written by something that we don't control. There is something greater. So you can't come in and reinvent reality like the left wants to do. They want to reinvent human nature. They want to say a boy is a girl's a boy. They want to say, there's no need for nation states because we think they're wrong. Property is bad because it separates people, makes inequality. They want to create absolute equality as a virtue and turn the world into a gigantic beehive. You believe in God, you believe that those rules and those the moral and ethical code can't be manipulated because it's divine, because it's supernatural. So whether or not individual Jews are religious, the fact is that Israel is Jewish. And as such, it does represent, if not de facto is, a religious state that believes in God. So the capitalism and the Judaism, those are the two things that the left has been trying to abolish since Marx. And that's why they hate Israel.
Okay, so there are profound problems with that view. First of all, Zionism, and specifically Israel, the idea itself was concocted, and the place itself was brought to life, like actually made into a reality by staunch, hardcore atheists, most of whom were socialists.
That's true. But it wasn't concocted. I mean, Zionism is a part of Judaism going all the way back to Abraham. The modern Zionist movement was dominated by that. But Zionism is something that we could trace it back every generation. You've had Zionists who are trying to. It's just in modern times they're able to do it. We could get into a history of this, and I could make that case.
The yearning to go back to Israel, that is a thread going back through the ages, because God gave it to us. Zionism is more than that.
Well, the modern Zionism movement, you're right.
It's a modern political movement based specifically not on the ideas of nothing about Judaism. It is not a Jewish idea. It is based on the ideas emerging at that time of nationalism. It is a national movement of the Jews. It speaks nothing of Judaism. Not absolutely nothing.
I reject that. I mean, first of all,
you can reject it.
No. Let me just respond briefly, Johnny. 19th century, the religious Zionist movement has not gotten the kind of press it should get, but the fact is that it precedes the secular national movement. The Vilna Gaon and the Hovevi Zion movement in Russia was ultra orthodox and religious, and they did make Aliyah. They made Aliyah around the 1860s. Yeah. So you have, and that was a huge movement that has not gotten the kind of play that it should have gotten because the secular Zionists didn't really, have a place for that. And I also don't think that you can say flat out that the secular Zionists were not Jewish, I mean, in any way. I
So
think that they
again,
had,
well,
some levels of Judaism.
there is okay. I am a nationalist, and
Um,
I believe strongly in it. So you'll have to believe me now on a few things. Chovevei Tzion, as I said, the rest of Jews throughout the ages, Shana Haba B'Yerushalayim Habnuya, right? They keep saying it each prayer next year and built Jerusalem. Yeah, they keep saying it. They did not build Jerusalem. More importantly, they had no concept of the idea of sovereignty, which is why I say it is a modern national movement. The idea of we are a people and belong to a specific land, and we deserve sovereignty to basically self-rule, right? This is a modern idea. Interestingly, it has its roots in the Jewish Bible because Jews can be considered to be the first nation, right? I mean, yeah, for all intents and purposes, we
For
were.
sure.
We were
For
the
sure.
first people connected to a specific strip of land with a specific, even you can think of it of citizenship, right?
Yeah.
We inherit citizenship, and you can become a citizen. You've mentioned converts. Well, Trump's daughter, with all due respect, and that rabbi, with all due respect, King David's mum was a convert.
That's
Right?
right. That's right.
So you can't.
Ruth. That's right. Of course, it goes way
And
back.
yeah. So and by the way, and that's my favorite story in the Bible. Um,
Absolutely.
and I will mention something else interesting about Jewish ethnic identity. When Ruth herself, and she's the first convert, when she joins Judaism, she does so by saying one sentence: Your people is my people, your God is my God. Importantly, and everything that is written in the Bible is important. That I will grant you and the rabbis, because when you have a text surviving for so long with so many people writing it, editing it, and when it's so costly to write the damn thing, if it's written in a way, there's a good reason for it. And there is a reason why people comes before God. More importantly, there is a reason why the Bible is in fact a story of a people adopted by God who keep rejecting him and doing everything that they can to piss him off.
Well,
And
that's the
and they
great,
still
great spiritual struggle that
and,
continues in
and they
Judaism.
still yeah and they
Of course.
but importantly they are still considered as Jews in the Bible, right? This is why we keep
Right.
getting punished.
Right.
So obviously the ethnic identity within Judaism supersedes that of the religious one. Judaism itself has changed so many times throughout the ages, right? The first extra biblical mention of Israel is 1200 BCE, right? The Merneptah Stela, that's the first time somewhere outside the Bible we have this idea. So, at the very least, we can say that Judaism, in some form or another, or the ethnic identity of Israel, in some form or another, exists at least 3,200 years, at the
Right.
very least.
I agree.
In this time, Judaism, or the religious belief of that people, called Israelites, which we are the descendants of, and we can go into that too, have changed so many times. But one thing did not change: the fact that we are a people, the fact that we see each other as not just genealogically connected, but connected at a different way, almost metaphysical, not almost, a metaphysical connection, and not necessarily a religious one, or not a religious one per se, not exclusively a religious connection. The idea of the state of Israel, the idea that Jews should be a sovereign people, comes from a very basic idea. Jews are a people. That's it. That's enough.
I
Because
think
if
that
you are a
it's
people,
everything you're saying, John, is true, but it's you're missing half the story, and that is that the thing that made us Jews is that we believed in God, and that we looked at our sitters every single day, 3 times a day, and we prayed to that God, and that even the secular Zionists, the people like Theodor Herzl, if you look at their writings, if you look at their utterances, David Ben Gurion, all of them, yeah, they were secular. They weren't hardcore atheists, though. I don't think that's true. I
oh, they
think that,
were.
I mean, I don't, I think they also saw a spiritual aspect to their mission. And you can see the conversations between Ben Gurion and the chief rabbi of Israel on that. And I think they understood the spiritual dimension of it. There is a spiritual, Zionism is a national and a spiritual movement for the Jewish people. The aspirations of Israel as a sovereign state is political and spiritual. It's very unique in that way. It's not just a national movement like other national movements. There is a spiritual component to it. That's obvious. And there is, to try to suggest otherwise is being simplistic. And I include in that the most secular of Israelis, who I think understand this. They may be secular, but they still look to Orthodox Judaism and normative Judaism as the authority when it comes to Judaism. And there are tensions in Israel between the secular and the religious, and both sides have their pluses and minuses. But I would still argue that it is a general understanding that the raison d'etre of Israel, the mission of Israel, is the national aspirations, but also the spiritual aspirations of the Jewish people.
Okay. So, first of all, and this is now something that I do in my Hebrew cast, is the greatest threat today to Judaism, to the Jewish people, not Judaism, to the Jewish people is Orthodox Judaism, ultra-Orthodox Judaism. And the greatest threat thus means that the adoption that Israel has made stupidly so was the fact that so Israel is the state of the Jews. Jews are a people and they have a mythology like most other nations out there. The Greeks have their own mythology. The Finnish, they have their own mythology. The ancient peoples have mythologies of their own. Now, you want to call it religion? Fine. I say it's a mythology. You say that it's God. I say, well, the people invented God, not God invented the people, obviously, but I'm an atheist, so I would say that. And okay, one thing about Zionism, just a sec. Ben Gurion didn't marry, and he married his wife. It wasn't a Jewish wedding, and he wouldn't even wear a kippah in a funeral, in a Jewish funeral. He was that atheist. Go on the complete opposite side of the compass, right? The guy who they called a Nazi and a fascist and everything, Zev Jabotinsky.
Yeah.
He was a staunch atheist. So
Right.
much so, I mean, and hardcore one.
No, I get that. I understand that.
And most importantly, unlike Chovevei Zion, these are the people that strive towards the idea of sovereignty. Chovevei Zion, they simply want to be here, which is cool. Most of the time, they just want to die here.
No, I'm not talking about today's ultra-Orthodox community in Jerusalem. I'm talking about the movement in Russia in the 19th century, Vilna Gaon and them. They were nationalists and Zionists.
How much were they? It was what, like
it was
him
huge,
and about 300 people?
No, it was enormous, and there needs to be a book written about it. It was not emphasized because the people that wrote the history books were the atheistic Jews. Now, look, we've already gone over it. We're going to go on a merry-go-round here.
Yeah. We can go into.
We're not going to agree. But I think we've laid out the positions, and maybe in a way we have respectively laid out some of the fissures and the conflicts that naturally exist in Israel, because Israel ultimately is a free society. So, we all have our differences of opinion, and we could get into that. It's a separate issue. Johnny,
obviously you are wrong and I am right.
Of
And
course,
so,
of course.
just in case you were wondering.
Yeah, in case anyone's wondering. Johnny, but we're reaching toward the end of the program, so I want to
I want to give
you the last word. I want you to talk a little bit about where you do your thing online and where people can reach you. Don't you want to talk about do you have anything you want to promote? I mean, you're welcome to.
So, I don't need to promote anything. For now, I do mostly Hebrew, but I won't go into that. I actually want to drive home the last point, which is talking about nationalism. You say they look at it spiritually. I think they don't give a shit about spirituality or how spiritual we are, and if we are religious, if Israel is a religious state. What they care about, they look at us, and you're in the States, I'm here in the UK. Anti-nationalism is extra mainstream leftists now. I mean,
right.
They're not globalists,
capitalism.
They're internationalists.
One world
regardless
and
now of capitalism.
right, exactly.
Yeah, and they see that, and they look at Israel. It's an exclusionary nationalist, ethnic nationalist state, and they hate the very idea. Yeah, so that is obviously one of the reasons why the left sees us as this appalling institution. Then there's another thing which you have in modern leftist thought, which is this idea of intersectionality and how oppressed are you compared to someone else. And obviously, if you are oppressed, therefore you are just.
Right.
And how do I know if you're oppressed? You're weak. That's enough. I don't care who's to blame. I don't care who's violent. I don't care anything. I don't care what the reasons are. If you are weak, like the Palestinians, you are therefore oppressed. And if you are oppressed, there is obviously an oppressor who is obviously evil. So you have the nationalism part, you have the weak and the strong part. I don't think capitalism is that, like free market is that much of
they despise that, I think.
They despise it, but Israel
it results in inequality.
But Israel has a lot of inequality issues.
Of course.
But remember that still, compared to the United States, Israel is still a welfare state at the end of the day.
Well, every country is compared to the United States. I mean, the United States is the font of freedom. I mean, but anyways, Johnny, this is great.
So I think
and you sure you don't want to mention your website or anything?
Okay, so I have my YouTube channel, Jonny Versity, which I don't really maintain anymore. Part of it is because doing anything in English when you are in England you can end up in jail for. So I just decided not to do that anymore.
What the hell is going on with Ireland, with Israel? I mean, talk about anti-Israel. They had a Holocaust Remembrance Day, and they didn't invite the Israelis.
Yeah.
What the hell is that about?
Oh, well, they for a large chunk of history, they saw themselves in line with the Palestinians. In fact, they helped them in there was a mutual love there in terms of killing people. Interestingly, maybe somehow Corbyn has something to do with it. He loved those Irish terrorists and he loves those Palestinian terrorists. And they cooperated.
So there was some link between the IRA and the PLO?
Oh, the PLO. Oh, yeah. The weapons and everything. Yeah. Definitely.
Interesting history. I'll have to do that another time. And very good. Johnny, listen, thank you so much for joining me. It's been great.
Yeah, you're welcome.
I really appreciate it. Yeah,
it's nice arguing with someone who's wrong.
That's why I do this. And this will be up on my channel, so I'll send you a link.
Okay, awesome.
All right. Thanks a lot.
Good. Peace, love, and harmony.
Thank you. Yes.
Have a good one, man.
You too.